The measuring tape clicked against the concrete. 3.7 inches. Margaret Chen's hands trembled as she stared at the citation, $504, excessive grass height. Behind her, the HOA president's smirk faltered when David stepped out of the shadows, manila folder in hand. "You made one mistake, Patricia," he said, his voice deadly calm. "You messed with the wrong family." What Patricia didn't know was that David had been documenting everything, every violation, every fabricated rule, every illegal fine. And in exactly 37 days, he would stand before a judge and watch the woman who the sprinkler system clicked off at exactly 6:47 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 3 years. Margaret Chen wiped her hands on her gardening gloves and stepped back to admire the emerald carpet that stretched across their front lawn. Every blade stood at a perfect 2 3/4 inches. She'd measured it herself yesterday evening. Just to be sure. "Looks beautiful, Maggie," David called from the kitchen window, steam rising from his coffee mug. "The Hendersons next door are probably jealous." Margaret smiled, brushing a strand of graying hair from her forehead. At 58, she took pride in their small suburban home in Willowbrook Estates. After 32 years of marriage, she and David had finally saved enough to buy their dream house, a modest 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and enough garden space for her prized roses. She was deadheading the last of the summer blooms when the golf cart's electric hum caught her attention. Patricia Blackwood's pristine white cart rolled to a stop at the curb, its brass nameplate gleaming in the morning sun, HOA president. Margaret's stomach tightened. Patricia climbed out with the measured precision of a military inspection, her platinum blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon, her pressed khaki pantsuit wrinkle-free despite the humid August morning. She carried a leather portfolio and wore the expression of someone who'd found exactly what she was looking for. "Good morning, Patricia," Margaret said, forcing warmth into her voice. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Patricia didn't respond. She walked directly to the center of Margaret's lawn, withdrew a metal measuring tape from her portfolio, and knelt down with theatrical precision. The tape clicked as she extended it. 3.7 inches, Patricia announced, her voice carrying across the quiet cul-de-sac. Section 4.2 of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association bylaws clearly states that grass height shall not exceed 3 inches at any point during the growing season. Margaret's throat went dry. "Oh. I measured it myself yesterday. It was exactly 2 3/4 inches. Grass grows, Margaret. That's what grass does." Patricia's smile was sharp as a blade. "Especially when it's overwatered and overfertilized." "Overwatered?" Margaret's voice cracked. "I follow the watering schedule exactly. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, just like the guidelines are recommendations. The bylaws are law." Patricia pulled out a pre-printed citation form and began filling it out with a gold pen. "First violation, $500. If this isn't corrected within 72 hours, the fine doubles." Margaret felt the world tilt. $500. They'd been saving for David's retirement, counting every penny. "Patricia, please. This is ridiculous. It's 7/10 of an inch. Rules are rules, Margaret. Maybe if you spent less time gossiping with the other residents and more time maintaining your property." "I don't gossip." The words came out harder than Margaret intended. "I've never said a negative word about anyone in this neighborhood." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Haven't you? I seem to recall you questioning my decision about the Hendersons' mailbox color. And wasn't it you who suggested the community garden idea without proper board approval?" Margaret's hands clenched at her sides. The community garden, she'd mentioned it casually at a block party, thinking it might bring neighbors together. Patricia had shot it down immediately, claiming it would attract undesirable elements. "That was just a suggestion. Suggestions have consequences." Patricia tore off the citation with a flourish. "You have 72 hours. I'll be back to remeasure on Thursday morning." As Patricia climbed back into her golf cart, Margaret noticed Mrs. Henderson peering through her curtains and old Mr. Rodriguez slowing his morning walk to stare. The humiliation burned in her chest like acid. David appeared at her side as the cart disappeared around the corner. "What was that about?" Margaret handed him the citation, her hands shaking. His face darkened as he read. $500. For grass that's barely over 3 inches. She measured it herself. 3.7 inches. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. David, we can't afford this. Not with your blood pressure medication and the new roof we need. David pulled her close, his jaw tight with anger. We'll figure it out. But I'm not letting that woman bully you. She's the HOA president. She has the power, she has the authority the residents gave her. But authority without accountability is just tyranny. David's voice carried a weight Margaret hadn't heard since his days as a corporate compliance officer. And I know a thing or two about holding people accountable. That evening, David sat in his home office, laptop open, surrounded by printed documents. Margaret brought him a sandwich and found him deep in concentration, highlighter in hand. What are you working on? Research. He looked up at her, his eyes sharp with purpose. Did you know Patricia's been HOA president for 6 years? And in those 6 years, she's issued over 300 citations. Margaret frowned. Is that normal? For a neighborhood of 57 houses? Absolutely not. David turned his laptop screen toward her. Look at this. The average HOA issues maybe 20 citations per year. Patricia's averaging 50. Margaret studied the spreadsheet David had created. Names, dates, violation types, fine amounts. The numbers were staggering. The Johnsons got fined $300 for their son's basketball hoop being 2 inches too close to the street. The Garcias were cited for having excessive decorative elements because they hung a single wind chime. And look at this, David pointed to a line highlighted in yellow. The Stevensons were fined $1,200 for unauthorized structural modifications because they added a small deck to their backyard. But they got approval for that deck. I remember them talking about it at the community meeting. Exactly. But somehow, Patricia's records show no approval was granted. David's fingers drummed against the desk. She's been doing this for years, Maggie. Creating violations where none exist, enforcing rules that don't match the actual bylaws, collecting fines that disappear into the HOA account. Margaret sank into the chair beside him. What are you saying? I'm saying Patricia Blackwood has been running a personal fiefdom and she's been getting away with it because people are too intimidated to fight back. David closed the laptop and turned to face her fully. But here's the thing about bullies, they are not used to being challenged. And they make mistakes when they get comfortable. David, I don't want to make this worse. Worse for who? For Patricia. His voice was gentle but firm. Maggie, you're the kindest person I know. You bake cookies for new neighbors, you check on elderly residents when they are sick, you volunteer for every community event. You don't deserve this. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. I just want to live in peace. I know. And you will. But first, we're going to make sure Patricia learns what happens when she picks on the wrong family. David spent the next 3 days gathering evidence. He requested copies of all HOA bylaws, board meeting minutes, and financial records, documents that were legally required to be available to homeowners. He interviewed neighbors who'd been cited, many of whom had stories eerily similar to Margaret's. Mrs. Chen's violation was scheduled for re-inspection Thursday morning. David made sure he was there. Patricia arrived at 8:30 a.m. sharp, her golf cart loaded with measuring equipment and a smug expression. She'd brought witnesses this time, 2 other board members who flanked her like bodyguards. Good morning, Margaret, Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I trust you've corrected the violation. Margaret had spent 2 hours the previous evening with electric hedge clippers, cutting every blade of grass to exactly 3 inches. Her knees ached from crawling across the lawn with a ruler, but she'd been thorough. Patricia knelt with her measuring tape, clearly expecting to find the same violation. Her confident expression faltered as she checked spot after spot. 2 7/8 inches, she muttered, moving to another section. 2 3/4. 3 inches exactly. She stood up, her face flushed with annoyance. Well, It appears you've managed to comply with the basic requirements. Thank you, Margaret said quietly. However, Patricia continued, pulling out a fresh citation form. I'm noticing some irregularities in your landscaping that require attention. David stepped forward. What kind of irregularities? Patricia's smile was razor-thin. The grass pattern is inconsistent. Some sections appear to have been cut with different equipment, creating an aesthetically displeasing patchwork effect. Section 3.7 of the bylaws requires that all lawn maintenance present a uniform and attractive appearance. That's interesting, David said, his voice deceptively calm. Because I have a copy of the AC. The phone rang at 6:23 a.m., jolting Margaret from an uneasy sleep. She fumbled for the receiver, her heart hammering as she recognized the number on the caller ID, Willowbrook Estates Management. Mrs. Chen. This is Bradley Hoffman from WEM. I'm calling to inform you that your homeowner's insurance has been flagged for immediate review. Margaret sat up, fully awake now. I'm sorry, what? We've received reports of potential safety violations on your property. Our insurance carrier requires an immediate inspection, or your policy will be suspended within 24 hours. Safety violations? What kind of? I'm not privy to the specifics. The inspection is scheduled for this morning at 9 a.m. Please ensure someone is present to provide access. The line went dead. Margaret stared at the phone, her stomach churning. David was already awake, his face grim as he pulled on his clothes. Let me guess, he said. Patricia's first move. How did you know? Because it's exactly what I would do if I were corrupt and desperate. David's voice was hard. She's trying to get us evicted before we can file our complaints. By 8:45 a.m., the street was crawling with vehicles. A fire inspector, a county health official, a building code enforcement officer, and 2 men in suits, who introduced themselves as insurance investigators. Patricia arrived in her golf cart at exactly 9 a.m., flanked by Gerald and Linda, both of whom looked deeply uncomfortable. Good morning, Margaret, Patricia said, her voice sickeningly sweet. I hope you don't mind, but I've taken the liberty of requesting a comprehensive safety inspection. As HOA president, I have a responsibility to ensure all residents are in compliance with county ordinances. David stepped onto the porch, his expression calm but his eyes dangerous. Comprehensive inspection? Based on what complaint? Anonymous reports, Patricia replied smoothly. Concerns about electrical hazards, potential structural issues, and possible health code violations. Margaret felt her face burn with embarrassment as neighbors gathered on their porches to watch. Mrs. Henderson's curtains twitched. Mr. Rodriguez stood openly on his lawn, his expression troubled. The fire inspector, a heavy-set man named Captain Torres, approached with his clipboard. I need to inspect your smoke detectors, electrical panel, and any potential fire hazards. Of course, Margaret said, her voice barely steady. Please, come in. What followed was 3 hours of systematic humiliation. The inspectors went through every room, every closet, every corner of their home. They tested outlets, examined wiring, scrutinized the furnace, and photographed everything. The health inspector swabbed surfaces and collected samples. The building code officer measured room dimensions and checked permit records. Margaret watched in horror as strangers rifled through her home, taking notes and whispering to each other. Patricia stood in the living room like a conquering general, her satisfied smile never wavering. Find anything interesting? David asked Captain Torres as the man finished checking their smoke detectors. Actually, no. Everything looks up to code. Better than most houses I inspect, honestly. Torres looked puzzled. Not sure why we got called out here. Really? Nothing at all. Your electrical panel is newer than required, smoke detectors are compliant, and your fire extinguisher is properly maintained and current. Torres shrugged. Cleanest inspection I've done this month. The health inspector emerged from the kitchen, equally confused. All surfaces test negative for contaminants. No pest evidence, no structural moisture issues, no violations of any kind. One by one, the inspectors reported the same results. No violations. No safety concerns. No problems whatsoever. Patricia's smile began to crack. That's impossible. The reports were very specific about what, exactly? David's voice was sharp. Because these gentlemen just spent 3 hours going through our home and they found nothing wrong. The anonymous complaints mentioned electrical hazards. What electrical hazards? Captain Torres interjected. Their panel is up to current code and their wiring is professionally installed. Better than most new construction, I see. Patricia's face was flushing red. There were structural concerns. The building code officer said, this house is solid. Foundation is sound, no settling issues, no permit violations. I don't know who made these reports, but they were wrong. The insurance investigators finished their photographs and approached David. Mr. Chen, your policy is in good standing. No issues found that would affect your coverage. As the officials packed up their equipment, Patricia made one last desperate attempt. What about the lawn chemicals? The overwatering that's causing runoff? The health inspector looked at her with barely concealed annoyance. We tested for chemical residue and found nothing above normal levels. And there's no evidence of excessive watering or runoff. After the last vehicle departed, an uncomfortable silence settled over the cul-de-sac. Gerald and Linda stood awkwardly beside Patricia's golf cart, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Patricia, David said quietly, that was quite a show. I don't know what you mean. You called in false reports to city officials. That's filing a false police report, which is a misdemeanor. It's also harassment, which, depending on the jurisdiction, can be either a misdemeanor or a felony. Patricia's eyes narrowed. You can't prove, can't I? David pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. I've been recording everything. Since yesterday. Including your conversation with someone named Marcus about making the Chen problem go away. Patricia's face went white. You can't record me without my consent. Actually, I can. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's perfectly legal. David's smile was cold. And I know you called the city offices yesterday afternoon. In fact, I have the call logs. Gerald stepped forward nervously. Patricia, maybe we should shut up, Gerald. Patricia's mask was finally slipping. You have no idea what you're dealing with, David. I've been protecting this neighborhood for 6 years. I've kept the property values high, I've maintained standards, you've been embezzling money and terrorizing your neighbors. David's voice was deadly calm. And now you've involved city officials in your personal vendetta. That's abusive. Process, at minimum. You think you're so smart, Patricia hissed. But you have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I do. You're capable of fraud, extortion, and filing false reports. But you know what you're not capable of? Winning a legal battle against someone who actually knows the law. Patricia climbed into a golf cart, her hands shaking with rage. This isn't over. You're right. It's not. David's voice followed her as she drove away. But it will be soon. That evening, Margaret sat in their kitchen, still shaken by the day's events. David, I'm scared. What if she escalates this? What if she gets us thrown out of the neighborhood? She can't. We own this house and we are current on all our obligations. David sat across from her, his expression gentle but determined. But you're right to be worried. Patricia is desperate now, and desperate people do dangerous things. Maybe we should just move. Find somewhere else. No. David's voice was firm. We are not running from a bully. And we are not letting her drive us out of our home. Margaret looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw something she'd never seen before. A hardness in his eyes, a set to his jaw that spoke of absolute determination. Who are you? She asked quietly. David's expression softened. I'm your husband. And I'm someone who spent 32 years investigating corporate fraud and holding executives accountable for their crimes. Patricia thinks she's dealing with a retiree who'll roll over and play dead. She has no idea she's picked a fight with Someone who's made a career out of destroying people like her. Over the next 2 days, David worked with methodical precision. He filed formal complaints with the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Office, the State Consumer Protection Agency, and the District Attorney's Fraud Division. He submitted detailed financial records, witness statements, and recorded evidence of Patricia's violations. But he also did something else. He started calling the neighbors. Mrs. Henderson. This is David Chen. I'm putting together a group of residents who've been affected by Patricia Blackwood's illegal activities. Would you be interested in joining a class action lawsuit? The response was overwhelming. 41 of the 57 homeowners agreed to participate. People who'd been silent for years suddenly found their voices, sharing stories of harassment, illegal fines, and intimidation. The Amadas had been cited for excessive holiday decorations and fined $300. The Garcias had been charged $500 for a wind chime that violated no actual rules. The Stevensons had paid $1,200 for a deck that was properly permitted. The list went on and on. David compiled everything into a comprehensive legal filing that would have made his former colleagues proud. By Thursday morning, he had a case that could not only remove Patricia from power but potentially result in criminal charges. He was just finishing the final paperwork when Margaret called from the kitchen. David, you need to see this. He found her standing at the window, her face pale as she stared at their front yard. David looked out and felt his blood run cold. Their lawn was destroyed. Not just damaged, systematically destroyed. Someone had poured industrial-strength herbicide in a pattern that spelled out TII. The emergency neighborhood meeting was called for Friday night at 7 p.m. in the community center. Word had spread through Willowbrook Estates like wildfire, not through official HOA channels, but through whispered conversations over fences and urgent phone calls between neighbors who'd finally found their courage. Margaret stood at the back of the room, watching as residents filed in with expressions ranging from nervous hope to barely contained rage. The Hendersons clutched a folder of their own HOA violations. The Garcias held hands, their usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. Even elderly Mr. Rodriguez had come, his walker clicking against the linoleum as he found a seat in the front row. I never thought I'd see this many people stand up to her, Mrs. Henderson whispered to Margaret. Patricia's had us all scared for so long. David stood at the front of the room, his laptop connected to a portable screen. Behind him, a PowerPoint presentation waited, months of investigation compiled into devastating clarity. He'd spent the day refining every detail, every piece of evidence, every legal argument. Thank you all for coming, David began, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. I know this took courage. Patricia Blackwood has made it clear that she doesn't tolerate dissent. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people glanced toward the entrance, as if expecting Patricia to burst through the doors. She's not coming, David continued. Because she knows what we are going to discuss tonight. And she knows she can't defend the indefensible. The first slide appeared on the screen, Willowbrook Estates HOA, a pattern of fraud and abuse. Over the past 6 years, Patricia Blackwood has systematically violated her fiduciary duties as HOA president. She's embezzled community funds, issued fraudulent citations, and used her position to intimidate and harass residents. David's voice was calm, professional, devastating. Tonight, we are going to end her reign of terror. The next slide showed financial records. The HOA currently has $3,200 in its improvement fund. According to your assessments and legitimate expenses, it should have over $47,000. Gasps echoed through the room. Gerald, one of the board members, raised his hand with a shaking voice. David, I swear I didn't know about the missing money. Patricia always said she was handling the finances. I know, Gerald. You and Linda were kept in the dark deliberately. Patricia needed useful idiots to legitimize her operation. David's words were harsh but true. She's been paying herself through shell companies and fake consulting fees. The evidence mounted slide by slide. Forged signatures on violation notices. Citations for rules that didn't exist. intimidation tactics against residents who questioned her authority. The room grew quieter as the full scope of Patricia's crimes became clear. "She's been stealing from us," Maria Garcia said, her voice thick with emotion. "We've been paying her to abuse us." "That's exactly right," David replied. "And it's about to stop." The final slide appeared: legal actions filed. The list was extensive: criminal complaints, civil lawsuits, state regulatory violations, and a formal petition to remove Patricia from office. The district attorney's office has opened a criminal investigation. The State Consumer Protection Agency is conducting an audit. And on Monday morning, we are filing a class action lawsuit seeking full restitution plus damages. Mr. Rodriguez struggled to his feet, his voice shaking with age and anger. "What about the vandalism? What she did to your property?" "The police have arrested Patricia for criminal mischief, vandalism, and making terroristic threats. She's currently out on bail." David's smile was grim. "But that's just the beginning." The room erupted in cheers and applause. For the first time in years, the residents of Willowbrook Estates felt hope. But the celebration was short-lived. The community center doors slammed open, and Patricia Blackwood strode in with two men in expensive suits. Her face was a mask of cold fury, and she walked with the confidence of someone who believed she still held all the cards. "Well, well," Patricia said, her voice cutting through the sudden silence. "Having a little party, are we?" The room went dead quiet. Several residents shifted uncomfortably, old fears reasserting themselves despite everything they'd just heard. "Patricia," David said calmly, "you're trespassing. This is a private meeting." "Private?" Patricia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "This is HOA property, and I'm the HOA president. That gives me the right to be here." "Actually, it doesn't. You're currently facing criminal charges and have been suspended from all HOA duties pending investigation." David's voice remained steady, but Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders. "Suspended by whom?" "These sheep." Patricia gestured dismissively at the assembled residents. "I've been protecting this neighborhood for 6 years. I've maintained property values, enforced standards, and kept the undesirable elements out. You've been embezzling money and terrorizing your neighbors," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice shaking but determined. "We know what you've done, Patricia." Patricia's gaze fixed on Mrs. Henderson with laser intensity. "Do you, Carol? Do you really? Because I know a few things about you too. Like how your husband lost his job 8 months ago and you've been lying about it to keep up appearances." Mrs. Henderson's face went white. Around the room, other residents shifted nervously, suddenly remembering why they'd been afraid of Patricia for so long. "I know about the Garcia's immigration status," Patricia continued, her voice dripping with menace. "I know about the Stevensons' marriage problems. I know about Mr. Rodriguez's grandson's drug arrest. I know everyone's secrets." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia had just revealed the true source of her power, not just the HOA authority, but the dirt she'd collected on everyone over the years. "And if anyone thinks they can destroy me," Patricia said, her voice rising, "they are going to learn what it really means to have an enemy." David stood up slowly, his expression calm but his eyes dangerous. "Are you threatening these people, Patricia?" "I'm informing them of the consequences of their actions." "Actions have consequences, David. Your wife is about to learn that lesson." Margaret felt ice water in her veins. "What do you mean?" Patricia's smile was pure malice. "I mean that your husband's little crusade is about to cost you everything. Your reputation, your standing in the community, your peace of mind. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never moved to Willowbrook Estates." The room erupted in angry voices, but Patricia spoke over them. "I've been building a file on every one of you. Financial problems, family secrets, legal troubles, I know it all. And if you persist in this witch hunt, I'll make sure everyone else knows it too." David walked slowly toward Patricia, his presence somehow filling the room despite his quiet demeanor. "Patricia, you just made several more criminal threats in front of 43 witnesses. Are you absolutely sure you want to continue down this path? I'm sure I want to protect my neighborhood from troublemakers and their enablers. Your neighborhood? David's voice was soft, deadly. These people aren't your subjects, Patricia. They're your neighbors. And they are not afraid of you anymore. Patricia looked around the room, and for the first time, Margaret saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. The residents who'd cowered before her manipulation were sitting straighter, their faces hard with determination. You think you've won, Patricia said, her voice losing some of its commanding tone. But you have no idea what you've started. I have connections. I have resources. You have nothing, David interrupted. You have a criminal record, a mountain of evidence against you, and a community that's finally seen through your act. Patricia's composure cracked completely. You sanctimonious bastard. You think you're so much better than me. You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built. I think I can hold a criminal accountable for her crimes. And I think these people deserve to live in peace without being terrorized by a petty tyrant. One of Patricia's lawyers stepped forward. Mr. Chen, my client is prepared to offer a settlement. Full restitution of HOA funds, resignation from the board, and a written apology to all affected residents. The room went silent. Margaret held her breath, waiting for David's response. David looked at the lawyer, then at Patricia, then at the assembled residents. Counteroffer. Patricia pleads guilty to all criminal charges, pays full restitution plus damages, surrenders all HOA authority permanently, and agrees to never hold any position of power in a homeowners association again. That's ridiculous, Patricia started. Those are the terms, David said calmly. Take them or we'll see you in court. Patricia's face cycled through rage, desperation, and finally, something that might have been fear. You can't do this to me. I won't let you destroy my life. You destroyed your own life when you decided to abuse your power and hurt innocent people. David's voice was implacable. The only choice you have now is whether you want to face justice with dignity or continue digging yourself a deeper hole. Patricia stared at him for a long moment, then turned on her heel and stalked toward the door. This isn't over, David. Not by a long shot. As the door slammed behind her, the room erupted in cheers and applause. But Margaret noticed that David didn't look celebratory. He looked worried. What is it? She asked quietly. Patricia's not the type to go quietly. The call came at 3:17 a.m., shattering the silence of Margaret and David's bedroom. Margaret fumbled for the phone, her heart racing as she recognized Mrs. Henderson's number. Margaret, Carol Henderson's voice was barely a whisper, thick with terror. They broke into our house. Margaret sat bolt upright, David already reaching for his clothes as he heard the panic in her voice. Carol, are you hurt? Did you call the police? They didn't take anything. They left. A message. Carol's voice broke into sobs. Written on our bathroom mirror in red lipstick. It said traitors get what they deserve. David grabbed the phone. Carol, this is David. Are you and Jim safe? Where are you now? We are at our daughter's house. We were too scared to stay. David, there's more. The Garcias called 20 minutes ago. Someone slashed their tires and spray-painted deportation on their garage door. And the Yamadas as someone threw a brick through their front window with a note tied to it. David's face went stone cold. What did the note say? Stop the lawsuit or next time it won't be just property. Margaret watched her husband transform. Before her eyes. The gentle retiree vanished, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. David's voice when he spoke was deadly calm. Carol, I want you and Jim to stay at your daughter's house. Don't come home until I tell you it's safe. I'm calling Detective Morrison right now. David, maybe we should just drop this. Maybe it's not worth, no. David's voice cut through her feel like a blade. This is exactly why we can't back down. Patricia has crossed the line from harassment into terrorism. And terrorists only understand one thing. The next few hours passed in a blur of police sirens, crime scene investigators, and shaken neighbors. By dawn, 5 families had been targeted in coordinated attacks. Breaking and entering, vandalism, intimidation, and threats, a systematic campaign of terror designed to break the communities. Resistance. Detective Morrison stood in the Hendersons' living room, photographing the lipstick message on the bathroom mirror. Mr. Chen, this is clearly organized. Multiple locations hit simultaneously, similar methods, coordinated timing. Whoever did this had help. Patricia Blackwood, David said without hesitation. She threatened everyone at the meeting last night. She said we'd learn what it means to have her as an enemy. Can you prove she was directly involved? David pulled out his phone and showed Morrison the photographs Patricia had taken outside the community center. She documented everyone who attended the meeting. These attacks targeted the most vocal supporters of the lawsuit. Morrison studied the images. This is helpful, but we need more. Did anyone see her or her associates near the crime scenes? Actually, yes. Mr. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his walker clicking against the hardwood. I couldn't sleep, so I was sitting by my window around 2 a.m. I saw Patricia's golf cart parked at the end of the street. She was talking to 2 men in a dark van. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Can you identify the men? One of them was that lawyer who was with her last night. The other? I'd never seen him before, but he was big. Looked like the kind of man you hire when you want to intimidate people. David felt the pieces clicking into place. Patricia's contingency plan. She hired muscle to terrorize the neighborhood. We'll need more evidence to make charges stick, Morrison said. But this is a good start. Detective, you're thinking like this is a normal criminal case. It's not. David's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades building cases against smart criminals. Patricia is desperate and cornered. She's not going to stop until she's destroyed or stopped permanently. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we give her exactly what she wants. A direct confrontation where she thinks she has the upper hand. David's smile was sharp as a knife. And then we destroy her completely. By 10 a.m., David had called an emergency meeting at his house. Not in the community center where Patricia could monitor them, but in his living room with only the core group of residents who'd been targeted. She's trying to break us, David explained. To the assembled group. Classic intimidation tactics. Make us afraid to leave our homes, afraid to stand up for ourselves, afraid of what she'll do next. Mrs. Henderson looked exhausted, her usual neat appearance disheveled. Maybe she's right. Maybe we should just let her win. I can't take much more of this. Carol, I understand your fear. But let me ask you something. David's voice was gentle but firm. What happens to the next family that moves into Willowbrook Estates? What happens when Patricia decides to target someone else? Do we let her continue terrorizing people because we were too afraid to stop her? Maria Garcia spoke up, her voice shaking with anger. She called immigration on us. False report, but they still came to our house. Terrified our children. Made us feel like criminals in our own home. That's a federal crime, David said grimly. Filing false reports with federal agencies. That's a felony and it carries real prison time. How do we prove she made the call? We don't have to prove it yet. We just have to make her think we can. David opened his laptop and began typing. I'm sending Patricia a message that's going to drive her absolutely insane with paranoia. The email was simple, devastating. Patricia, thank you for making our case so much easier. The federal agencies appreciate citizens who provide such clear evidence of their own crimes. The paper trail you've created is remarkable in its thoroughness. See you in court. David Chen P.S. Marcus says hello. David hit send and leaned back in his chair. Now we wait. Margaret stared at him. David, who is Marcus? I have no idea. But Patricia mentioned him on the phone last night, and she's going to assume I know more than I do. David's smile was predatory. Paranoid people make mistakes when they think their secrets are exposed. The response came within 20 minutes. Patricia's email was a barely coherent rant filled with threats, accusations, and denials. But buried in the verbal assault was a crucial admission: Marcus was acting on his own initiative, and I had no knowledge of his methods. David read the email aloud to the group, his voice triumphant. She just confessed to knowing Marcus and having a relationship with him. And she implicated him in the attacks while trying to distance herself. But she said she didn't know about his methods, Mrs. Henderson pointed out. Doesn't matter. She admitted to a relationship with someone who committed crimes on her behalf. That's conspiracy. David was already forwarding the email to Detective Morrison. Patricia just handed us the evidence we needed. But Patricia wasn't done. At 2 p.m., she called David directly, her voice a mixture of rage and desperation. "You smug bastard," she hissed. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" "I think I'm thorough," David replied calmly, motioning for Margaret to start recording the call. "Just like the federal investigators who are now very interested in your activities." "What federal investigators?" "The ones who investigate housing discrimination, filing false federal reports, and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations." David's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Did you know that threatening people based on their immigration status is a hate crime? Even if they are citizens?" Patricia's breathing was audible over the phone. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Then why are you so scared?" "I'm not scared of you, David. I'm angry. Angry that a troublemaker like you is trying to destroy everything I've built." "Everything you've stolen, you mean?" David's voice hardened. 6 years of embezzlement, fraud, and intimidation. Did you really think it would last forever? It would have if you'd minded your own business. Terrorizing my wife is my business. Vandalizing my property is my business. And when you decided to wage war on an entire neighborhood, you made it my mission to destroy you. Patricia's laugh was bitter. "Destroy me? You have no idea what you're dealing with. I have resources you can't imagine. I have connections, you had connections." Past tense. David's voice was deadly quiet. "Because I've been very busy this morning. I've been talking to people. Important people. People who are very interested in a certain HOA president who's been committing federal crimes." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, more desperate. "What do you want?" "I want you gone. Permanently. Resignation, restitution, and a signed confession to every crime you've committed." David's voice was implacable. "And I want you to call off your dogs. No more threats, no more vandalism, no more intimidation. And if you refuse, then tomorrow morning, you'll be arrested on federal charges. Your house will be searched, your bank accounts frozen, and every detail of your criminal enterprise will be front-page news." David paused for effect. "Your choice, Patricia. Surrender with some dignity, or be dragged away in handcuffs." Another long silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I need time to think. You have until 6 p.m. tonight. After that, the offer expires and you deal with the consequences." David hung up and looked around the room at the assembled residents. Their faces showed a mixture of awe and satisfaction. "Is it over?" Maria Garcia asked quietly. "Almost," David replied. "But Patricia's got one more card to play. She's going to try to run, and when cornered animals run, they are at their most dangerous." As if summoned by his words, David's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Chen, this is Marcus Volk." The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like a scene from a crime thriller. David sat in his car, engine running, watching for any sign of movement. Marcus Volkov had chosen the location, neutral ground where they could talk without Patricia's knowledge. Margaret gripped his hand tightly. "David, this is insane. We should call the police." "And tell them what?" "That we are meeting with a man who might prevent Patricia from hurting people." David's voice was calm, but Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders. "Marcus is our only source of information about what Patricia's planning. Without him, we are flying blind." The black SUV pulled up exactly at 8 p.m. Marcus Volkov stepped out, a tall, lean man in his 40s with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to violence. But his expression wasn't threatening. If anything, he looked troubled. David rolled down his window as Marcus approached. "Mr. Volkov." "Mr. Chen." Marcus's accent was thick but his English precise. "Thank you for coming. I know this is unusual circumstance. What's Patricia planning?" Marcus glanced around the empty parking lot before answering. "She has lost all reason. Tonight, she wants me to escalate situation. Make example of your family specifically." Margaret's blood went cold. "What kind of example?" "Hospital kind," Marcus said bluntly. "She wants you hurt badly enough that others drop lawsuit. She thinks if she breaks you, neighborhood will fall in line." David felt a surge of protective rage so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. "And you're telling us this because I am criminal, Mr. Chen, but I am not monster. I intimidate, I threaten, sometimes I hurt people who deserve hurting. But I do not attack innocent families in their homes." Marcus's expression was grim. "Patricia has crossed line that even I will not cross. What's the plan? How is she going to do it?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them a series of text messages. "She wants your house burned. With you inside. Make it look like electrical. Fire, old house, faulty wiring, tragic accident." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David stared at the messages, his mind racing through the implications. "She's planning to murder us." "Yes." "And then blame deaths on unfortunate consequence of harassment campaign. Make herself look like victim who tried to resolve dispute peacefully." Marcus's voice was disgusted. "Woman has lost all grip on reality." David pulled out his own phone and began typing rapidly. "I'm forwarding these messages to Detective Morrison and the FBI. This is conspiracy to commit murder." "Will not be enough," Marcus said. "She will claim messages are fake, that I am lying to help your case. Need more evidence." "What kind of evidence?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Kind where she confesses on recording while trying to hire different person to do job." Over the next hour, Marcus outlined a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. He would tell Patricia that he was backing out, that the heat was too intense. Then he would recommend a replacement, someone more willing to do whatever was necessary. That someone would be David, wearing a wire and recording Patricia's confession to conspiracy to commit murder. "This is insane," Margaret said for the dozenth time. "David, she knows what you look like. She'll recognize you immediately." "Not if she doesn't see my face," David replied. "Marcus, do you have contacts who could provide a disguise? DA professional makeup, voice modulator, different clothes. Make you look like different person entirely." Marcus nodded approvingly. "But bigger problem is your manner. You talk like educated man, like businessman. Need to sound like someone who kills for money. I can handle that." David's voice when he spoke again was rougher, lower, with a slight accent that made Margaret barely recognize him. 30 years in corporate compliance teaches you to deal with all kinds of people, including the ones who operate outside the law. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Perhaps this will work after all. 2 hours later, David stood in front of a mirror. In Marcus's safe house, barely recognizing himself. Professional makeup had changed the shape of his face, added scars, and aged him 15 years. Contact lenses turned his brown eyes blue. A wig and fake beard completed the transformation. The voice modulator was nearly invisible, tucked behind his back teeth. When he spoke, his voice came out gravelly and menacing. "Patricia Blackwood wants to hire me to solve a problem," he said to his reflection. "Question is, how much is she willing to pay?" Margaret stared at her husband in amazement and terror. The gentleman she'd married had vanished, replaced by someone who looked capable of genuine violence. "David, I'm scared." He turned to her, and for a moment, his eyes were his own again, warm, loving, protective. "I'm scared too, Maggie. But This is the only way to stop her before she hurts someone. Before she hurts you. The meeting was set for 11 p.m. at Patricia's house. Marcus would arrive first, explain that he was backing out, and recommend his associate, who was more willing to handle extreme situations. David would arrive 30 minutes later, wearing enough recording equipment to document every word. As David prepared to leave, Detective Morrison called with an update. "Mr. Chen, we've made some progress. The vandalism attacks were definitely coordinated, same spray paint, same methods, same timing. We've got one of the perpetrators in custody. And is willing to testify that Patricia hired him." "That's good news, but it might not be enough," David said carefully. "Patricia's escalating. She's planning something much worse." "What kind of worse?" David chose his words carefully. "The kind that requires federal intervention. I'll have more information for you in a few hours. Mr. Chen, if you're planning something dangerous, I'm planning to get justice for my neighborhood. Everything else is just details." Patricia's house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, isolated from her neighbors by tall hedges and her own paranoia. David watched from across the street as Marcus's SUV pulled into her driveway. Through the large front windows, he could see them talking in Patricia's living room. The conversation lasted exactly 23 minutes. Marcus emerged looking troubled, glanced toward David's hiding spot, and drove away. David waited another 7 minutes, then approached the front door. Patricia answered on the first ring, her eyes wide with desperate hope. "You're Marcus's friend." "I'm the guy who solves problems that Marcus won't touch," David replied, his modified voice rough and dangerous. "Question is, lady, how big a problem you got?" Patricia led him into her living room, glancing nervously toward the windows. The space was immaculate, sterile, like a museum display rather than a home. She poured herself a large glass of wine with shaking hands. "Marcus said you were having trouble with some neighbors," David continued, settling into a chair and studying her with cold eyes. "Said they were causing you legal problems. They are trying to destroy me." Patricia's voice was high, frantic. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've built. That bastard David Chen thinks he can just waltz in here and tear down 6 years of hard work. And you want them to stop?" "I want them gone." Patricia's eyes glittered with hatred. "Permanently gone. I want David Chen and his sanctimonious wife to disappear, and I want the rest of the neighborhood to know what happens to people who cross me." David felt his blood run cold, but kept his expression neutral. "Lady, you're talking about killing people. That's a big step up from vandalism and intimidation. They forced me to this." Patricia screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "I tried to handle this civilly. I tried to work within the system. But they wouldn't listen. They wouldn't back down. Now they've left me no choice. Choice is always yours. Question is how much you're willing to pay for that choice." Patricia named a figure that made David's head spin. She was offering enough money to buy a house, all to murder him and Margaret. "And how do you want it done?" David asked, his voice steady despite the horror he felt. "I don't care how you do it. Accident, robbery gone wrong, whatever. Just make sure David Chen suffers. First, I want him to know that crossing Patricia Blackwood was the last mistake he ever made." David nodded slowly. "When?" "Tonight. Tomorrow at the latest. I can't wait any longer. Every day they are alive is another day they can destroy me." Patricia's voice was rising to a shriek. "I want them dead, do you understand? I want them erased from existence." "Understood." David stood up slowly. "Money up front, cash only. And if things go wrong, I was never here." Patricia rushed to a wall safe, her fingers trembling as she entered the combination. She pulled out stacks of cash, more money than David had ever seen in one place. "Half now, half when it's done," she said, pressing the money into his hands. "Just to make it quick for the wife. She's annoying, but she didn't start this. David Chen is the one who needs to pay." David pocketed the money, knowing it would be crucial evidence. "I'll be in touch." As he reached the door, Patricia called after him. "Wait. I want proof when it's done. Pictures or something. I need to know that David Chen is really gone." David turned back, his expression cold as winter. "Lady, when I'm done with David Chen, there won't be enough left to photograph." Patricia's smile was pure malice. "Perfect." David walked back to his car, his hands shaking as the enormity of what he'd just heard settled in. Patricia hadn't just wanted them intimidated or beaten. She'd wanted them murdered, and she'd been willing to pay a fortune to make it happen. He drove straight to the police station, WH.